This is the DG&S campaign recap series, Adventures in Darkadia Chapter 4, The Tower of Blood. The Wild Willie slipped through the narrow channel into Duskbreaker Harbour at sun. The harbour sat upon jagged outcroppings, its defences mirrored in the other ports along the coastline, an unspoken reminder that Port Rodania tolerated visitors, but only on its own terms. From the deck, the group saw the first signs of the city's less guarded nature. Prostitutes, exposing themselves and calling out from the piers, offering their company to the incoming crews. Kerrick stood at the rail, his eyes scanning the harbour with the familiarity of someone who had been here before. This was the furthest north he had ever sailed in his previous life, and while much had changed, the reputation of Port Rodania remained the same. As the ship drifted toward the docks, he shared what he knew. Known as the merchant capital of the West and the city of coins, Port Rodania was a labyrinth of stone and coin, divided into walled districts stacked along the cliffs. Duskbreaker Harbour, where they had arrived, was watched over by the sentinel towers, twin fortresses bristling with guards and archers who inspected every ship. Above it sprawled Terrace Town, or Midtown, the bustling heart of the city with its inns, taverns, and the great Ravenec Colosseum at its centre. Higher still lay the Starwatch district, the high city of marble facades, manicured gardens, and noble estates. And below, pressed against the waterline, the shanties spread in winding lanes, home to the city's labourers and outcasts. Kerrick spoke too of the city's history, how it had once served as the capital of West Yalford during the bloody civil war of 515, and how today it was ruled by Lord Calric Rodania. Prosperity here was fueled by maritime trade and the power of the Guild of Merchants. In fact, one of its headquarters dominated Midtown. But prosperity had its shadows. Kerrick had heard in the College of Whispers that a rising criminal power, the Shadowfang, now held sway over much of the city's vice. Led by three figures known only as the Devil, the Cat, and the Butcher, their influence spread through gambling dens, brothels, and taverns at every level of the city. Nix mentioned that a dwarf banker in Kingsdawn had spoken of his cousin, Borsam Thurdak, a loan officer in the Rodanian Bank who enjoyed betting on underground dwarf brawls. It was a small thread, but perhaps a useful one. When the ship docked, the group paid their fare, exchanged farewells with Captain Willie, and walked the harbour to a gated wall. Guards demanded their business and an entrance fee before allowing them through. A long climb up narrow stone stairs brought them into Midtown. Compared to Kingsdawn's straight, sunlit avenues, Port Rodania's streets were narrow, twisting and close, the buildings pressed together like old secrets. Though also built on an Elvani city, there was no trace of the white Elvani stone that marked Kingsdawn and Avonport. This was a human city of grey and brown, heavy and close. Only the Colosseum, glimpsed above the rooftops, showed true grandeur. Kerrick led them through streets lined with brothels and loud taverns until they reached the Minstrel's Boot, where they secured 3 rooms and took the still-sick Tamara and Lily upstairs to rest. Morning came grey and damp, the air cool despite summer. The party split. Gadwin and Kerrick set off to locate the city's archives and gain access to old shipping records, while the others explored. Disguised as Yalford Crown investigators, Kerrick's silver tongue and Gadwin's steady professionalism convinced the clerks to grant them access. The dusty search paid off. Kerrick discovered that the Windkeeper had indeed sailed from Port Rodania, north still to the kingdom of Andalon and the settlement of Undalden, Nordra's home port. Gadwin uncovered scraps suggesting possible merchant guild connections to mercenary work, but nothing conclusive. Meanwhile, the others spotted a weathered notice on a job board. Mysterious occurrences at the lighthouse, help needed urgently. Onali was more interested in another posting about a missing sea captain's parrot, but the group agreed the lighthouse sounded promising. They met Eliza Merrow, the young keeper who shared duties with her uncle Gerald. The lighthouse stood beyond the harbour walls on a rocky outcropping, the sea crashing at its base. Eliza explained that strange green lights and whispering voices had plagued the tower at night, leaving her uncle sleepless and unwell. Inside their house that lay near the lighthouse, Gerald was pale and gaunt, his hands shaking. He spoke little, but the guilt in his eyes was hard to miss. He described the green fire that sometimes replaced the lighthouse's light and the ghosts that circled the tower. At sunset, they set their watch. Gadwin and O'Nally remained at the top with Eliza. Kerrick accompanied her down to the living quarters, while Livia and Nix patrolled outside. As night fell, the flame at the tower's crown flickered and died. For a heartbeat, the world was dark. Then it flared back, green, burning and wrong. From the cliffs came ghostly whispers. The sea below shimmered with a green glow, and Livia saw wreckage shifting in the waves. Nix kept watch on Gerald through a window, seeing him toss and mutter in his sleep. O'Nally and Gadwin attempted to strike at the ghostly shapes swirling around the lantern room, but their attacks passed harmlessly through the spectres. Livia, deciding the source lay in the water, dove from the rocks. O'Nally shifted into a crocodile and followed. Beneath the waves, Livia came face to face with the apparition, a woman's spirit draped in seaweed, her eyes dark pits. Cold passed through Livia's chest as the spectre's touch tore at her strength. The fight above and below was chaotic. Nix, still watching Gerald writhe in his bed, heard him cry out, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Unsure of what to do, and on impulse, Nix threw a psychic blade. The strike was sharper than he intended. Gerald went still. Below, the spirit faltered. O'Nally and Livia dug into the seabed, uncovering the source of the glow, a green stone etched with Theosian runes, clutched in the bones of a long-dead sailor. They brought it to shore, and as the stone left the water, the light faded and the sea stilled. Eliza rushed down to meet them, joy in her eyes, until they found her uncle lifeless in his bed, dried blood at his ears. She wept, saying the nightmares had finally claimed him. Kerrick put a hand on her shoulder, his gaze hard on Nix. He said nothing in front of her, even as she pressed a small pouch of gold into his palm. He gave some back to help with a funeral. Kerrick recognized the telltale signs of death by psychic blade, having seen it on the rats below King's Door. Back at the minstrel's boot, Kerrick confronted Nix and was angry. The deep gnome admitted he hadn't meant to kill the man, but claimed he was certain Gerald had some guilt in the matter. The argument was short. Exhaustion won out. Gadwin studied the strange stone late into the night, while O'Nally tended to Livia's wound. The others drifted to sleep, the crash of the Rodanian surf just beyond the walls, and the memory of green light still fresh in their minds. The next morning in Port Rodania dawned grey, the sea mist hanging thick over the terraces. Tamara woke from uneasy dreams, shadows of the party's deaths, replaced by doppelgangers, and found herself feeling better for the first time since the voyage. She took a long, steaming bath at the minstrel's boot, and despite Lily's protests, insisted the girl do the same as she was covered in ink. Gadwin and Kerrick had other plans. The strange green stone from the lighthouse weighed heavily on their minds, and they decided it was time to seek proper expertise. Livia, restless, left for the Ravenek Colosseum to learn its rules and the process for entering the fights. O'Nally, ever drawn to distractions of the odd and whimsical, followed a lead on a missing sea captain's parrot, a pursuit that, to no one's surprise, she eventually completed successfully. The Hall of Scarlet Sorcerers dominated a stretch of Midtown's higher terraces, a majestic semicircular structure of deep red stone that seemed to shimmer faintly with an inner light. Manicured gardens lined the approach, their cobbled paths engraved with glowing runes. The high arches, stained glass windows depicting legendary arcane battles, and the great enchanted dome of the central chamber gave the building the air of both a fortress and a shrine. Inside, floating orbs illuminated a vast marble-floored foyer, where the air smelled of ancient parchment and rare incense. Presenting a writ from the arcane eye, Gadwin was granted entry for himself and Kerrick, though the gatekeeper reminded him, pointedly, that he was responsible for his guests' conduct. They were led deep into the hall, to a secluded wing where darker magics were studied. There they met Master Sorin, a necromancer whose cluttered workroom hummed faintly with restrained power. His gloved hands accepted the green stone with cautious reverence, placing it on a rune-carved pedestal. Sorin's spells confirmed what his eyes already suspected. The Theosian runes etched into the stone marked it as a necrotic artifact of dangerous potency, capable of raising the dead under a curse bound to guilt. If the bearer was slain and the killer felt remorse, the stone would resurrect the bearer as an undead bent on vengeance. Gadwin asked whether the curse could be broken while keeping the stone intact. Sorin shook his head. It is too far gone. Its only purpose now is destruction, psychological as much as physical. Pressed on what should be done, Sorin recommended destroying or locking it away under strict warding, hinting that the Hall would gladly take it for safekeeping. A glance from Gadwin to Kerrick carried its own meaning. Kerrick smiled faintly and leaned forward. Artifacts of this kind are not simply found, they're fought for. Perhaps a finder's fee would be appropriate? After a moment's thought, Sorin agreed. From the Hall's Artifact Recovery Fund, they were awarded 400 crowns, with a formal letter of claim to present at the Dwarven Bank. The transaction complete, they left the Hall, the city's noise rushing back in. But as they stepped onto the sunlit terrace, Gadwin's eyes caught on a figure watching them from a balcony above. A silver-haired elf in muted grey-blue robes embroidered with strange runes, standing apart from the scarlet-clad mages. His gaze lingered before he turned away. That night, the group reunited over supper. Livia told them that in 2 days' time, the Ravenek Colosseum would host a grand event, a staged reenactment of an adventure made famous by the 3 leaders of the Shadowfang Syndicate, the Cat, the Devil, and the Butcher. The names alone carried weight in Port Rodania, whispered in the same breath as noble titles. Kerrick, who had heard rumours of their influence, suspected they were not human at all, a rare and dangerous achievement in Yarlford's aristocracy. When the Colosseum offered a team slot for the reenactment, they signed on without hesitation. They were costumed to match the infamous adventurers' companions. Onali as Ursus, a Goliath bloodhunter who could take the form of a werebear. Gadwin as Gil Gafrit, the Fire Genasi sorcerer now leading a rebellion in far-off Talal. Livia as Star, the half-orc barbarian. Nyx as Shadow, the silent cat-like rogue. Kerrick as Nadia, the cunning infernal thief. Tamara and Iliac took the roles of generic crew. The story of the Stormbreaker. The performance told of Captain Holly Cutthroat Carver and her crew's quest for the Stormbreaker, an ancient sea elf relic hidden in the fog-shrouded Drussian Isles. The voyage brought them into battle with corrupted merfolk, the dreaded Merrow, before they stormed a temple guarded by a Merrow sorcerer and water elementals. The heroes escaped with the relic and their lives, returning to Port Rodania as legends. On the night of the show, Livia fought in a few preliminary matches, the moniker Sharp-Eared Spear already catching in the crowd's chants. Then the group gathered in the Colosseum's underworks, standing on the deck of a mock ship as hidden mechanisms raised it into the arena's flooded central pit. From across the stands, 3 figures watched from a private box. A hooded humanoid with feline green eyes, a pale-skinned woman in a fine gown, white hair crowned with curling horns, and a half-orc in leather armor, leaning forward in excitement before catching herself and scowling. The battle began. Conjured elementals disguised as Merrow surged from the water. The group fought with both skill and showmanship. Gadwin launching loaves of bread and bits of rigging with his magic to mimic Gilgafrit's style. Tamara swinging wildly on a rope from the mast, shrieking battle cries. Onali shifting mid-fight into a towering bear fort. An encore was demanded. The stage shifted to the temple's final chamber, where they clashed with the mock Merrow priest and his guardians. When the last enemy fell, the Colosseum thundered with applause. Back in the underworks, while unbuckling armor and wiping away paint, a messenger approached with a sealed card. Inside was an invitation. The Cat, the Devil, and the Butcher request your presence at their residence in the Starwatch district this evening. The group exchanged looks. Curiosity outweighed caution. They agreed to go. Tamara stayed behind at the Minstrel's Boot with Lily, while the rest of the company ascended to the Starwatch district. Their destination was a mansion of pale stone and black iron gates that read above them, a place guarded discreetly but thoroughly. Inside, candlelight glowed against velvet drapes and polished mahogany, the air rich with perfume and old wine. In the drawing room, they met the trio. The Cat, known to others as Shadow, stood cunning and lean, his black fur gleaming faintly in the lamplight, green feline eyes regarding them with quiet amusement. Only Iliac, Kerrick and Gadwin had heard rumours of the elusive catfolk of distant Castrauden. Few had ever seen them and lived, having a famed reputation as assassins. The devil, called Nadia, was a striking woman with skin as pale as winter snow, her white hair framing a face marked by curling horns and bright yellow eyes and fanged teeth as she smiled. The butcher, Star, was a half-orc whose leather armour barely concealed a flash of pink silk beneath, quickly hidden as she crossed her arms and fixed them with a wary glare. After some pleasantries and acknowledgement of their skills and knowledge during the arena play, Nadia wasted little time. A new drug, blood powder, had begun to seep from Lowtown into the rest of Port Rodania, bringing with it violence, debt, and ruin. She wanted it stopped before it spread further. Shadow asked if the company could take care of the problem, and Kerrick agreed without hesitation. The shanties of Lowtown sprawled like a maze along the waterline, the air heavy with salt, smoke, and desperation. The streets twisted and narrowed, houses piled atop one another like the bones of a toppled giant. It was a place where fortunes vanished as quickly as they were found, and where every stranger was watched. Asking questions earned little in return. Livia and Iliac took to the rooftops to search from above, but when Iliac challenged her to a race down and decided the quickest way down was to leap from a second-story ledge, his poor landing left him limping until Onali mended the injury. Gadwin, ever blunt, spoke to two working women on a street corner. They pointed him toward 3 places where the blood powder was rumoured to be moving: Bones Alley, Gold Street, and Hangman's Alley. Hours of searching finally led them to the truth. The powder was being made in a leaning stone tower, its crooked shadow falling across a street that most avoided. Inside, a clandestine group of alchemists mixed red lotus, a rare herb typically used in medicine, with volatile magical reagents focused through Jong crystals. The result was a crimson dust that brought euphoria, strength, and speed, before tearing the mind and body apart. Kerrick's silver tongue and Gadwin's alchemical knowledge earned them entry into the operation. Gadwin was put to work at the benches, watching the process closely, while Kerrick shared words with the leader. The crystals, Gadwin discovered, were not from local merchants. They came from the Far East, specifically his homeland, the Valley of Hangyul. He recognized their pale sheen and angular facets instantly. The memory of masked raiders torching his home returned like a knife to the gut. Further conversation revealed the truth. The crystals had been bought through the Merchants Guild itself. Not the local branch in Port Rodania, but from their headquarters in distant Queros and the main headquarters on the island of Marique. While Kerrick and Gadwin played the part of new recruits, the rest of the crew moved through the shanties, cutting down dealers and scattering lookouts. When the time came, Kerrick and Gadwin shut the tower's steam valves, sealing the upper floors in a haze of scalding vapor. The others arrived just as the trap was sprung, only to be caught in a locked first-floor chamber, gas hissing from vents in the walls. In mouse form, Onali was thrown through a gap in the stone by Iliac. Using the passphrase Kerrick and Gadwin had learned, she unlatched the door from the outside. The group fled into the night as the tower erupted behind them in a roar of fire and shattering stone, sending fragments across the rooftops and turning the crooked spire into a collapsing ruin. By dawn, smoke still curled from the rubble. They met briefly with Star, Shadow, and Nadia, who listened to their account without comment and paid them. They could see the smoke billowing from the shanties through their mansion window. When Kerrick mentioned that their next destination was Andalon, Shadow's eyes narrowed. He spoke of an old friend named Ursus, said to be somewhere in the north, and asked them to deliver a message. There would be a reward if they succeeded. Gadwin left Shadow a mask, one from his past, and asked if they would be able to learn more. Nadia and Shadow agreed. The city was stirring now, whispers of the explosion already spreading. Knowing it was only a matter of time before questions reached the wrong ears, the company moved quickly. Banknotes were cashed, a borrowed book returned, Tamara and Lily gathered. Passage to Andalden was hard to come by. It was no major port, but Kerrick found a captain willing to take them as far as Newshire Harbour, from which they could travel north. 3.5 days later, they stood on the black, rocky shores of Newshire, the sea breaking hard against the cliffs. Kerrick arranged their onward passage with a crew of Anders returning home, their small, quick vessel well suited for the coastal run. A few days later, they landed in Houghton, a fishing village smelling of salt and pine. Supplies were bought, gear checked, and feet set upon the final stretch, 65 miles north to Andalden. The journey would take 12.5 days in all, and thanks to Kerrick's charm at the bargaining table, the total cost came to just over 100 gold for the lot. After finally recovering in Port Rodania, Tamara spent most of the trip pale and green from the roll of the sea.